Welcome to the Decent People podcast, a production of Decential Media, where we're committed to telling the stories of the founders, builders, and visionaries who are creating a new decentralized economy and internet experience. You guys know it as Web3 or blockchain, and we're going to bring you the smartest and most interesting people in the space for intimate conversations that reveal their background, how they got into crypto in the first place, and what they're doing today to make a decentralized future a reality. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure to check out our site at decential.io. Now to the show. Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Decent People podcast. I'm your host, Matt Leising. And today I've got somebody on the show who I've really been looking forward to talking to. He's an NFT artist whose work out there has cumulatively sold for about $3 million. So if you want to go out and scoop up all of the Bryan Brinkmans you can find out there, you're going to need about $3 or $4 million. He's also a fascinating guy and has a really interesting backstory on how he, as a visual artist, got into NFTs. Hey, Bryan, how are you?
Hey, thanks for having me, Matt. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So we met at a gallery opening, an NFT gallery opening in Venice a couple months ago. That was really interesting. One funny thing there was I got up the courage to go introduce myself to Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, who is a huge idol, like a huge hero of mine. And you might think it's funny, like as a reporter doing my job, I'll go talk to anybody, I'll introduce myself, whatever, it's not a big deal. But as a fan, it was really kind of nerve-wracking just to go up to him and tell him like what a seminal part of my life, like The Simpsons has been. So that was a pretty interesting event that we had a chance to meet at.
Yeah, no, I felt the same way. I mean, it was wonderful to meet you. First off, I met you first. And then, yeah, Matt Groening. I mean, in terms of influences in this culture, I don't think people fully grasp how important he is to like the last 30 years of entertainment. It's just insane. And yeah, I mean, it probably had a big role in me going to school for animation and where I'm at now. So
yeah, wow, cool.
It was awesome to see him. That was so cool. And I know you were so excited to meet him, and yeah. I'm glad it all worked out.
Yeah, it's amazing watching that show as a kid and then in my adult years. Now I'm watching it with my kids and they get it just as well. It's just that timeless sort of brilliance of The Simpsons. But speaking of kids, I'd love to like go back and ask you where did you grow up and what were you like as a kid?
I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, and I was a pretty normal dorky kid. I played sports not very well, but I enjoyed playing sports. But I spent most of my time playing on the computer. I got into making graphics on the computer pretty early. And I would say, when I was in early high school, I started making content, animation content for websites like newgrounds.com, which, some people might remember, but it was basically Flash web shorts. And
Okay.
You'd get this feedback. People would be like, oh, this is terrible, get better. And you go, okay. But that kind of like, putting something out into the internet and then having people respond to it immediately, like that got me hooked. And I was like, okay, I want to make films. I want to make short. I want to make cartoons. And then I went to, that led me to go to college in Philadelphia for traditional animation because I wanted to.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think in our age of social media right now, we might forget that like earlier internet, like there wasn't that interaction that you could have with strangers, I mean, especially for artwork. Like I remember early internet in the early 90s, it was crazy to be in a chat room with somebody you didn't know who might be in Australia or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
But
yeah.
This is a whole nother level. Were you into like comic books and graphic art or stuff as a kid, or what got you into the sort of medium?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely collected some comics. I was really into trading cards of all sorts, whether it was sports or Marvel. I was really into collecting Marvel trading cards. And so I feel like I learned the Marvel universe through like collecting the full sets of Marvel characters and stuff like that.
God, you're gonna have to fill me in because I can't keep up, man.
Well, some of them come out now. I'm like, I don't even know who that one is. Yeah, I think I've always been a fan of that kind of content in cartoons and, or like, again, Flash cartoons. I was really, back then it was like frog in a blender type goofy stuff, but like it was free cartoons you could watch on the internet all the time. And so that was the kind of content I was eating up. This is all pre-YouTube.
Was it like the visual side that really appealed to you, or did you like the storytelling aspect of like a comic book? Or
I liked the humor of it. A lot of it was crude back then, but it was still like, short form content. And, on a technical level, the reason I think Flash cartoons, I guess at the time maybe it was called Shockwave too. There was something important there because video was super high file size. And so you couldn't fit any of that online very easily. And so the way around it was creating these vector-based Flash cartoons that could have a very small file size and play, crisp, visually, and sounds, all this stuff within those early internets when we were using dial-up modems and stuff. And so there was something interesting there. And so I think that just became like the way I was consuming content on the internet for a long time. And then creating for it, I was using Adobe Live Motion and Macromedia Flash to create all this stuff. And then you start. I
still remember the icon when in my browser, like your Flash player has crashed,
Yeah, the Flash player that was never up to date.
Yeah.
And then, once you start doing that, then you dive a little deeper and then you start to make Flash websites and you start to learn the basics of coding, and it becomes a rabbit hole that just goes on and on and on. But a lot of that stuff ended up evolving into what I did for a living for a long time, which is kind of motion graphics and doing, special effects and visual effects and motion titles and all sorts of other stuff for television and web.
Yeah. Do you have brothers and sisters?
I do have a little brother, Matt. Similar name. But yeah, no, he's a musician in Omaha. I find most of my family are musicians. I'm like the odd duck in that sense. Even though I think that we're all using the same side of our brain, I went down the animation route, but I do think there's a lot of similarities between music and rhythm and animation and comedy. It all hits these similar patterns. And if you look at a lot of my work, there's a lot of rhythm to the motion.
Yeah, I think they're languages of a sort, right? And I don't think they're very far apart either. So Omaha, Nebraska, one band I know from there is 311. Was that a big deal? Was that a big deal when you were a kid?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I saw them a few times. They were like the cool kids. And then when I got to high school, the music scene kind of evolved into this kind of indie emo space led by Saddle Creek Records. So there's like Bright Eyes and Cursive and The Faint. And so by the time I was old enough to have a car and go to concerts, those are the shows I was going to more. Yeah. But yeah, I have a soft spot for 311.
Yeah, me too. I don't listen too much anymore, but I definitely have a soft spot for him. You mentioned your family's got a lot of artists in it. Or were your parents artists?
My father's.
Musicians.
Yeah. Both my parents are accountants, but my father was also a musician he's in like 5-6 bands right now. Oh, cool. And so it was like, doing taxes during the day and going to concerts at night. So yeah, none of them are necessarily fine artists or anything like that, but definitely they encouraged my creativity in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So once you kind of got bit by the internet and you wanted more feedback, like what did you do? What were the next steps you took? Like, were you a serious artist in terms of like, were you not taking lessons, or like, how would you describe like your artistic kind of output or what you were doing back then as a teenager?
Yeah, I wasn't really I was taking classes in school and stuff like that, but I spent a lot of time, my school had a big graphic design program. And so you could. Is
this your high school?
My high school, yeah. And so you'd go to these like 2 blocks of the day, which were a quarter of your day, just learning photography, website building, design and animation, and film editing, and all this stuff. And it was just like I would make like those panoramic quick time 3D things around the school, so you could like tour the school in different ways, or it was just kind of like open to interpretation of whatever I wanted to do. And so during that time was when I was making a lot of these cartoons. And then I started, originally I thought I was going to go to college for graphic design. But then around that time I had done an internship at I think it was Omaha Magazine, and I saw the life of a graphic designer for a day, and I was like, oh, this does not look fun. It was like really fine tuning pixels of like positioning, and I was like, this looks, this isn't it.
A lot of
drudgery. So then I made a big hard turn, and I applied to some schools for animation. And I got into a couple, and then I went to Philadelphia, and then I was like, okay, this is where, in the end, what I did after is definitely a mixture of both of those skills. Motion design is graphic design plus animation. So it's like, but in the end, I think it ended up working out for the best, because I got.
Yeah, that's one thing I like about your NFTs. There's motion in almost all of them. So yeah, I can definitely appreciate that. What was art school like? Were you like, did you feel like it was a bit of a gamble, like, or did you have a practical side to it as well?
I definitely felt like it was a gamble, because in the end, I mean, looking back on it, I would say 10% of the people I graduated with in my animation program went on to work in the industry. It's a tough industry to break into. Yeah. What I ended up having to do was move up to New York and kind of find jobs to fill that. In the end, I'm not Matt Groening. I'm not a Disney animator. I'm much more rough around the edges with my art drawing style. And so I went and found work doing, motion design and website, and again, falling back into those jack of all trades that I could do for the first couple of years. Cause I think right around that time I graduated was when the US got hit with that like big recession.
Yeah, 2008, so the financial crisis.
Yeah, exactly. I graduated 2007. So I got my first job, and then everyone was like, you're stuck here. Don't go. The market's terrible. Stay where you're at. And so I was doing that, but then I was doing all this extra stuff on the side to kind of supplement me artistically, because it wasn't scratching that itch for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, going back to college, it was a kind of a school, even though it was a traditional animation school, it focused on experimental. It was more in line with, I would say, the Bill Plimptons of the animation world than the Matt Groenings, or like, so it wasn't like training us to be a Pixar animator. It was training us to be a film festival storyteller. And so I think that was a differentiator between where I went and like maybe a Cal Arts or something like that.
Okay. Yeah. So I love this story about you getting picked by Jimmy Fallon to see about like if they could kind of, why don't you tell the story about your Twitter experience, because I'm not going to do it justice.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm spaced on a year, but it was like 14 years ago now. The show Late Night with Jimmy Fallon just started. Prior to that, I'm a huge sucker for going to live tapings of talk shows. I'm fascinated by it. I love it. And being a broke artist in New York, it's like getting free tickets to go to a Broadway show, essentially. And so I love taking advantage of that. I'm very cheap. But I went to that one, and it was like the second week of the show, and I was just excited to see it. And then, I think they kind of pulled me out, and they did this experiment where they're like, we're going to have everybody follow you on Twitter, because Twitter's this brand new social media that just came out like last month. Jimmy just joined it. And so
we're in like 2009-ish, 2008.
I think 2009 might be right.
Yeah.
And they had Russell Brand. They had the two guys from Dig, which includes Kevin Rose, who's now a big part of the NFT space, were guests. Yeah. And they were like, they'd pre-selected me like right before the show or whatever to do this thing. So I knew it was coming, but then they were just like, everybody follow Bryan. And so, it was really intense, because I got like, 20, 30,000 followers like in a day. And
Wow.
then it was like, oh no, what do I do? I was getting like text messages from random people that found my number on my resume online and all this stuff. And it's just like, it was very overwhelming and very scary,
Yeah.
but it was exciting. But then it was one of those things where it was like, okay, now what? And then I wasn't in a position where I didn't have a product to sell necessarily. I didn't really know how to utilize it. And so I just kind of had fun with it. I did like crowdsourcing of assets to make short films with that I put into festivals later on. I just kind of goofed around. And in retrospect, I wish I had what I have now or something where I had like all these things I could sell and monetize and make a living off of it. But at the time, it was just like, okay, well, this is cool. And then I think what ended up happening was, I would say for the next 7, 8 years, I just lost followers every day. I'd lose dozens of
It's
followers
just
a
was
day.
going the wrong way, huh?
Every time I tweeted, people would unfollow me because they were like, "Oh, we just followed for this goof." But I would say in the end, maybe like 10,000 of those people stuck around and they liked what I was doing. They enjoyed my art and they really enjoyed following me. But it weeded out all these people that just did it for fun. But it
Yeah.
was also very kind of it was a bit of a mental health problem of just being like, why do people hate me? But at a certain point, you bottom out and then you regrow and you build. And now I'm well past where I was back then. So I feel really good about how things have gone. It
Yeah.
wasn't a forever decline.
That's great. It's hard for me to even imagine what Twitter must have been like in the early days. Was it a nice, gentle place, or like, has it always been like kind of the way it is today where can be rather toxic and cutting?
Well, it was way boring. I was like people taking photos of their food. It was everywhere at the time. It encouraged people to just tweet everything they did. I'm going to the grocery store right now.
Yeah.
It was very like people weren't using it in a marketing way or anything, and everything was very rudimentary. Like the things we take for granted now, like retweeting wasn't a button. You had to write RT
I remember that
and put the
RT, and
thing
then you
in and
paste
like
in the,
yeah. So it was
yeah.
like it reminds me of kind of like how NFTs are very early right now, and we're all kind of like figuring this out as we go, and it's improving. It reminds me of the early days of Twitter where like no one really knew what they were doing. You saw some people finding success, but like you know
Yeah.
even back then, like you were talking about like kind of toxicity, like during that moment where I got all those followers, I had more followers than like Fox News did on Twitter. Like it was very early on. And that was before anybody had over 1 million followers. So it was, even then it was like, again, similar to the NFT space where it was a very small bubble of people that were just enjoying the weirdness of it.
Yeah.
And so
We'll have
it's
to see what
something
Elon
to,
does, right?
yeah, we'll see.
Did
I don't know.
so did that Jimmy Fallon experience kind of launch you into like, I know you went on to work for the Late Show
Yeah.
and for SNL. Did
Not,
that like
yeah.
kind of get you in the door somehow, or?
Well, not directly. I mean, what ended up happening was, I mean, if you want the secret behind the scenes, the reason I was
Yes,
picked out of
please.
that crowd is because a friend of mine from college worked on the show, and he said, "Brian's in the audience. He's probably down for this." And so,
You had a Twitter account already, right?
yeah, but with like 7 followers or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Okay.
And so they picked me because someone, 2 people on the staff knew who I was and knew I was there randomly at that day. So it was a lot of circumstantial things that worked in my favor in that sense. But then, 4 years later, that artist, my friend Edmund, he left the show to go direct other things. And so when he left, he threw out my name as someone that might be potentially someone that could take over, since we both had the same background. We went to college together. We had the same skill set. We collaborated on a lot of things. And so it wasn't necessarily a one-to-one, like I was on this experiment and then I got the job,
Right.
but it was more just, again, networking, being in the
Yeah.
right place at the right time, knowing the right people.
Listen up, kids. It's important who you know.
Yeah, well, yeah. And in the end, like by the time I got the job there, I would say 80% of the staff that was there that second week had turned over and was no one even remembered it. Jimmy remembered and a couple other like people remembered it, but for the most part, nobody even knew what that was, because that was just one show
Yeah.
out of 1,000 shows,
Yeah, no, it just must become a blur for those folks doing
I
that.
know. Well, by the time
5
I
shows
had
a week.
left there, I think I had worked on like 1,600 shows.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Um, and then so then was it to SNL, like Saturday Night Live from the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I worked on them kind of simultaneously because they're in the same building. There's a few floors apart, and there's a lot of crossover since a lot of the, especially the union people that work on Fallon, like the cue cards or the camera people or the control room, they'll do Fallon during the week, and then they'll do Saturdays on SNL.
Oh, okay.
Lauren Michaels is the EP of both shows. And so what happened was SNL would start to, they didn't have a visual effects department at the beginning, but they started to build it for the pre-tapes. And then they'd say, hey, we have this crazy bit. Can you come fill in on a Saturday? Help us do it. I said, okay. And then that became more regular over and over. And then it kind of was like a bell curve where I started just doing it sporadically. And then I was like full-time a part of the team for a few years. And then I started to taper off again because there was a moment where, you know, we're getting into the nitty gritty, but the Tonight Show, we were taping 2 shows on Thursday and having Fridays off, and that gave me more time so I could do 2 days of SNL and stuff like that. But it was a lot of like, yeah, I was just working 6 days a week making comedy for years.
Yeah. And what you were doing is like, if it's a green screen shot, then you're like creating the background and everything that the SNL character or Jimmy Fallon is a part of, right? Just for listeners to sort of like, kind of like, that's what the digital effects are on these shows.
Yes, I would say both shows, even though I worked on them simultaneously, I did very different roles in them. At the Tonight Show, I was a graphic artist, and so I worked with a team to create the monologue jokes, the segment opening. So it'd be like, we're doing Tonight Show superlatives, and then it's like 3D book would open up and a title would fly across or something.
Okay.
I would create that, and then if there was music performances that had backgrounds needed, or if there was green screens or set pieces or whatever, that was kind of again a jack of all trades graphic role. And then at SNL, I was a part of the visual effects team, which focuses primarily on the pre-tapes, which are the 2 to 3 short films they make in a show. It used to be kind of Lonely Island, and it's like commercials, music videos, you know, whatever else, kind of those fake documentaries about the show. And those would film on Friday, and we'd edit and put them together on Saturday.
Did you have anything to do with the Woomba commercial with
the Woomba?
It cleans my lady business.
I don't think I did that one.
Oh.
Maybe. I don't know.
Anyway,
some of them, again, some of them are a blur, but I don't think
that's one of my favorite SNL commercials of all time. Well, I don't know if you listen to the Mark Maron's podcast, WTF, but he kind of has this obsession with Saturday Night Live. I think he
does. Yeah.
He didn't get.
I've listened to quite a few of those. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't get. You know, he didn't like his audition went really badly, and he had this thing out for Lauren Michaels for a long time. But so I've listening to him. So there, you know, a lot of SNL stories there, and then another one I really like is Smartless with you know, the guys there. They have a lot of SNL guests on who are telling stories. So I wondered if you had an SNL story that you could tell us of something that was crazy or wacky or just out of the ordinary.
Oh man, that's a good question. Nothing too wacky. I got lucky. There was an episode last year that I was asked to work on and I didn't go in, and it was the one where everyone caught COVID. So I got very lucky. I was like, I had to go to Omaha for the holidays and I missed it. And then on the road trip back, everyone was like,
I'll let you think about it for a second and say here that you won 2 Emmys for your
technically 4, I guess. But yeah, I mean, the benefit of working at SNL is that it wins the Emmy every single year. It's a juggernaut in that category.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't have any insane stories. I mean, it's fun going to after parties and being around celebrities. Some of the most fun after parties to me are the ones that have music acts, like seeing like Anderson .Paak perform at like 4 a.m. Like those are awesome memories.
Yeah.
But for the most part, those shows are like a massive amount of stress. It's like it's like a Ninja Warrior for graphics, where you just like,
yeah, because the timelines are really tight.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So you have there's no extension, it's live. And so it's very much working against a clock that's constantly ticking, and it's like, how can you do the best you can within this time frame? And so they're fun in that they're a decathlon, but they're also extremely grueling. But in the end, it's everyone goes and has a drink afterwards, and you let loose and you feel good about it.
Yeah, sounds a lot like journalism when you're on a big deadline,
Yeah,
you got to hit it, and then let's go to the bar. So kind of in parallel to all this, were you like aware of Bitcoin and stuff, or how did you find crypto for the first time?
Yeah, so while I had some experience, I would say almost pre Fallon, when I was working at an MTV show, we were talking about crypto kitties, and I tried to get a wallet set up and I could not figure it out. I could not figure out how to use Mt. Gox for the best in retrospect. But what ended up happening was, in I would say probably around December 2019, an artist I collect physicals of, which you can see one of his pieces in the background on my Zoom, Killer Acid. I'm a huge fan of his. He had started sharing that he was selling SuperRare gifts. And so that sparked my interest because, I'd been making content for Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, whatever, blogs, all this stuff for years and years and years. And I was like, oh, this looks like it could be an interesting place for digital content.
Yeah. And let me just jump in. When you were making that stuff, were you selling it as well? Or was that just like you just were doing your art and putting it out there? Or were you actually trying to have a part of your career as, somebody who was selling private pieces?
Yeah, so there was a few ways I would do that prior to NFTs, which was I did gallery shows in LA for a gallery called Gallery 1988, which specializes in pop culture art. So they're like an official Rick and Morty art show, and you do a piece for that, or official Monty Python show, you do a thing based on focus features or something, MLB, whatever. I would take my digital art, I would print it on this printer behind me. And maybe I can actually show you a piece. Let's see. No. But I would print them on transparency paper, paint them with paint, build them into a shadow box like an animation cell, and then sell these shadow boxes of like faux animation cell scenes with depth.
Okay.
And so that was my way of taking my digital art skills and figuring out a unique way of making it a physical piece of art, because in my experience, people weren't buying digital art. Even if, to a degree, you could sell some of these like geekly prints or something, but like they're like $10 here and there. And so that was kind of my thing I did for quite a few years, like 6 or 7 years. At the same time, I would take my art and make music videos. I would do concert posters. I would do all these other things. I did a lot of t-shirts. I would challenge myself to make a t-shirt a week. I would screen print them. I was always trying to figure out ways to take my digital art and find a way to sell it as art. And it was always very difficult. I've sold plenty of it, but it was always just a fun side project. It wasn't something that would be a sustainable career.
Wasn't an issue back then as well, because it's digital. Before NFTs and blockchain became involved, you could just reproduce it a million times, right? So the value.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was big enough for people to want to do that necessarily, but maybe some people use them for like mood boards or something like that. But I think that was kind of the logic behind those shadow boxes, where I knew how much work and how to make them, that I don't think anybody would go through the effort to try and do that themselves, because it would take quite a few hours to produce one. And so that was kind of my way of making a one-of-one original. That wasn't just a straight print. The same thing with like screen prints are a little harder in that sense.
I think Andy Goldsworthy has that going for him as well.
What's his work?
Oh, he does things in nature where he'll like collect icicles and make like really intricate sculptures like outside, or he'll collect leaves and put them in a pond that's just like amazing, and then photograph it and have it filmed. So it's just basically impossible to replicate. Yeah, then it disappears. That's really cool. That's part of his thing. Yeah,
that's awesome. yeah. And so then I think that led me to discovering SuperRare. And then I kind of deep dove into like Ethereum, NFTs. I spent like a month kind of, I became fascinated with it, to be honest, for a couple of weeks. I was like,
Yeah.
this is interesting. Like, no one had really told me about it. I kind of just fell into it. But I was like, I see a huge potential because it's a way for me to do animation as art, which everything else I mentioned before was still. And it was like, in the end, animation is my backbone. I love motion, and I couldn't do that other than like making film festival films,
Mhm.
which is, in all honesty, a dying breed. We're not seeing a lot of film festivals anymore, and this is even pre-COVID. It was on the decline,
Sure.
and it also lent itself to what I enjoy doing, which is short form. Making a festival film takes like a year of work, and so I applied to SuperRare. I got on, and then I just kind of experimented. I wanted to kind of, even though I had done all that stuff before, I kind of threw it out the window and started fresh. And I was like, I wanted to constrain myself in a way, but also not constrain myself. And by that, I mean, I chose to work within a color scheme through all of my work, so that I didn't have to get stuck doing the same style over and over,
Mhm.
which kind of goes back to the LA gallery stuff where people would tell me, galleries want you to do the same thing over and over. What you're known for is what they want you to sell. And I understand that, but when I saw this space, especially because I didn't necessarily see NFTs as being a career, I saw it as another form of experimenting. And I was like, okay, well, this is going to be my experimental thing. I'm going to make experimental animation art with this.
Yeah. So you'll make a t-shirt each week and you'll make an NFT each week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it kind of falls into that same, like, what we've seen it with like Beeple too, where he does one a day or whatever. Like, I think we all like to kind of work within a set of rules that still allow us to find creative outlets. And so I think that's just the way my brain works, but I like working within that, like, okay, I can do a 3D piece here, I can do a 2D piece here, and I can change it up as much as I want. And then a year later, I'll have all these styles I can play with, which then again ties into my background of going to experimental animation school or being a jack of all trades. Like, I don't know what style I enjoy the most. And in the end, I'll probably get sick of any style I enjoy if I do it too much. So I have to create that kind of outlet for me to change it up. Otherwise, I'm going to get like, burnt out.
Yeah. I hope this isn't a dumb question, but when you started with SuperRare, did you just have to deliver the image to them and then they took care of the coding and the back end, for it to become an NFT, or were you also doing that as well?
Well, they have a back end uploading site. So you upload the image, you put in the description text, and then their contracts mints it for you.
Okay.
So I didn't have to write the contract in that
So you're not,
sense.
you didn't learn coding at the same time here.
No, and I'm still not a Solidity dev. I know part of me was like, oh, should I learn this? And I was like, no, I should just focus on the art and work with devs that actually know what they're doing. Because, as much as I enjoy coding, it's well beyond me. And we're seeing more and more people that think they know what they're doing that screw it up, and it can have horrible consequences.
Yeah, no kidding. And then you were mentioning, that you got really excited about being able to do animation in the NFT format. What's like the limit on what an NFT like lengthwise for like a piece of animation? Could you do a 3-minute cartoon, or are you working in like snippets of seconds?
That's a great question. There's a lot of variables, and it changes over time as well. So like that first like half year, I was doing SuperRare. MP4s, QuickTime files, or video files were not.
It's too much data, right?
Well, it just wasn't possible. They didn't have that coded in. And so there was a limitation of it. It had to be an animated GIF, which I enjoyed, because then you had a 50 megabyte limit that had to be a GIF format. And that, if you wanted to be over like 1,000 pixels, gives you about 3 seconds of time. But you start to learn how to like extend frames in the GIF and all this stuff. It became a technical challenge in a fun way to see how much you could get out of it. And if you look at the early crypto art and even my art now, it's all about that perfect loop where you get this like satisfying loop.
Right.
And that was to take advantage of, even though it's 3 seconds, if it loops in a really good way, it'll feel like 9 seconds before people start to catch that moment where it repeats. And so there was a lot of that kind of like fun gaming challenge to it of like, how can I get the most out of this? And then once they introduced video, it's still like SuperRare has a 50 megabyte limit. I did a piece a couple days ago that's 4K, so it's a huge file size. It's 30 seconds long, and I got it to be 48 megabytes, just so it fits. And so then, but you know, if you make it a smaller ratio, you can get it to be a 3-minute film, or you know, there's other platforms that have different file size limits, so you probably get a lot more on like Rareable or something. So it's all, there's so many variables, but in terms of like SuperRare, you got that 50 megabyte limit. So it's just a matter of squeezing it in whatever way you can to make it fit.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And are you still, did the people in your life understand what you're doing? Or are you still having that like discussion of like, no, it's actually not just a JPEG of a cat?
I think most people get it. My wife's very supportive of it. And even my friends understand it and have tried it. I think some of them are more questioning the longevity of the space. Some of them be like, oh, you know, it's, you know, the market's down right now. And some of them are like, well, what if it ever comes back? It's like, well, I don't think that'll happen, but you know, I think there's still a lot of doubts. But in terms of, you know, where I back then, 2 years ago, when I told people about it, I could not convince artists to join, even when I was like, there's something here. People are buying digital art. There's something to this that's bigger than what we've seen before. And it was hard to convince people. Everyone thought I sounded like a crazy person. Yeah. I've looked back on some of those emails. I'm like, it's going to sound crazy, but if you put this art on the blockchain, people will buy it. And, you know, even then I wasn't, I saw the potential. What happened was a month after I joined the SuperRare, COVID hit. And so I no longer had to commute into 30 Rock. I still worked at Fallon and SNL for another year before I left. But during that time, I was like, well, I have all this free time, not commuting in the morning at night, and I have no social life anymore. Like I do a comedy show in Brooklyn that got stopped for a while. All these galleries were no longer doing shows. And so I was like, oh, I have all this time. And I got lost in the metaverse. I went into crypto boxes, I went into Discords, and I just became kind of, I used that as my, like my socializing needs in a way. And so it kind of helped fill that void. And then meeting all these artists in the space just became so creatively invigorating, because I got to see what they were doing, how they were talking about the space. The collectors that were buying my work were educating about the space. Like some of my early collectors, I think, are some of the, you know, most important people early on. It's like Jimmy.eth and Whale Shark and Pranksy and all these people that were like building really cool ways of technology and socializing and community. I got to learn a lot from watching them. And so, yeah, I just got totally kind of like lost in it for a good chunk of time.
Yeah.
And I'm still lost in it.
Yeah. And I wonder what you think about this. If I don't know the history exactly, but the thing about NFT art that's great is that the artists, this is a new model for artists to get paid. And, you know, they're working directly with collectors, like you just were saying. And then you can encode into your NFT, you know, a part of that contract that like you can take a royalty if it gets sold on again for, you know, a higher price and then a higher price. And so it's really flipped the sort of transaction layer of the art world, and the gallery is no longer like as important. And I just wonder,
Yeah.
have you ever heard, like, was that always intended, or was that just like a great sort of consequence, or unintended consequence that came from that?
Um, when I joined, there was an active rebellion amongst the artists. And it happened, it's like a month or two before I joined, where the platforms, now we've come to have an understanding that 10% royalty for artists is kind of a standard on the marketplaces. But at the time, the marketplaces were starting to pull back on that and say, maybe we'll do 5%, maybe we'll do 3% for artists. And the artists all, to their credit, Coldy, Matt Kane, Mocha, like all these people that really went into bat and fought all the marketplaces and were like, we're the people that are giving you revenue, treat us with respect or we'll leave, kind of thing. They fought and got it pushed back up to 10. And so I was in a position where I kind of joined as that fight was getting won.
Mhm.
But that 10% royalty is a huge reason why artists join the space, because you're talking about the galleries I did in LA. Those galleries take 50%. That's the standard in New York and LA for a gallery.
Wow.
And
that's the only money you'll make from that piece.
exactly. And you don't even know where the piece sells to most of the time.
Yeah.
It's just lost into the world. And so
Wow.
now the fact that we can trace who owns what is huge, because one, it gives us a direct connection to the collectors in a way that I think is really healthy. And then, yeah, I've seen a lot of my art flip multiple times. And, early on, the money wasn't much, but like I sold my first NFT for $200, and then it sells at Sotheby's a year and a half later for, $70,000. It's a huge difference. And you make so much more money on that secondary royalty that you never would have realized on that primary sale. And so, it's once you explain that to an artist, and it's hard to take that away, because that to me is like the closest thing an artist has to a union kind of thing, where a system that supports you and gives you royalties and kind of stuff like that hasn't really ever existed for animation or art.
It's fascinating what you're saying about, and I didn't know this, about the platforms trying to sort of like, I guess old models die hard, because they seem to be like, okay, we're the gallery now, and we're gonna kind of do what we want to do with the artists. But here I'm really glad to hear that the artists were like, no, this is how it's going to work, or we're walking.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I mean, I joined the space in the very beginning of 2020, but Xcopy and all these people were in the space for like 2 years before that, really building it up. So, a huge amount of credit goes to those early builders.
Yeah.
And in the end, it's like we're still seeing a fight now with primary percentages. There's a wide range between 3% to 20% of what a platform takes from an artist. And
Is that kind of the range we're talking about with the different NFT platforms?
Yeah. And I think it's a fair range. You got the nifty gateways, they're going to drive a ton of traffic, so they're going to take a higher percentage. You got the foundation, that's all on the artists to promote themselves. They take a much smaller percentage now. They used to take 15%. Now I think they take 3 or 5% or something like that. So I think it's all adjusting based on how much work the gallery does. But even at 20%, that's 30% less than those galleries took in the physical world. So it's all moving in a good direction for artists.
Yeah, and on a bigger level, this conversation reminds me of just wrote an editorial today about, like, there was this letter sent to Congress, like from these technologists who are saying to Congress people, like, you really need to rein crypto in because it's dangerous for people. It's not doing anything new. It's full of scams. And it's like, it was a lot of misinformation and a lot of, I think, willful ignorance. And a point that they were making in their letter was like, this isn't doing anything for anybody. It's not helping anyone. And we're having this conversation right now about how your art is like now, basically sustaining you, and you're having these great new interactions with your collectors. And, this is just like one little slice. We could also talk about how musicians are using, NFTs to do things. And a lot of other things. So it just kind of struck me that um, I think people who still are saying that this is a fad or it's all scams are just like their eyes are closed to it. I think there's just no other
Yeah.
way to put it at this moment.
Well, even, it sustained me, but it's also helped a lot of my collectors. A lot of the people that supported me have seen, you know, their money returned in a wonderful way. Because as I continue to grow, more people buy my stuff. And,
Yeah.
I've had collectors come to me and say, I sold this piece. I feel really bad, but I was able to buy an engagement ring for my now fiance. And it's like, that's amazing. Like that's the dream. I think the hope is that flipping the art is one aspect of the value I hope to give my collectors, but I hope I can give them a lot of other value in the meantime as well, whether it's, airdrops or events or whatever. The community in my Discord is wonderful. And I think there's a lot of different ways that people can get value from buying art. And the same reason why I buy art from other artists. I buy a lot of the art I buy from artists without an assumption that I'll flip it. But it's more supporting an artist directly feels good, and you get an amazing piece of art that's special to you.
Yeah, exactly.
I think
It's
there's
something
something
you love.
wonderful about that. Yeah. That's like this art in the background of my Zoom. I'm probably never going to sell any of that art, and I'm okay with that. That's why I bought the art, was to look at it and enjoy it. And so I think there's a lot of different aspects to why I think, this is all focusing on the art side of the space. I think there's a plenty of legit criticism for the emerging gambling side of the space, which is a little more dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing about NFTs that are really interesting, anybody in the world can view them, and then there's one owner, right? But like, how often do you have that in the real art, like in the physical art world? It's,
Yeah.
if you're lucky, there's a piece in a gallery somewhere or a museum. Then of course there's the stuff that's in somebody's house, and you're never going to get to see that. But anyone can enjoy any NFT that's out there. They just don't own it, unless they want to. But just to kind of finish up, I was wondering, are you paying attention to, I think, like you said earlier, it's very early in NFTs. And I think there's going to be a lot of new novel uses for them. Are you paying attention to that at all? Does that interest you?
Just like new applications for it?
Yeah.
Always. Yeah. I'm a huge believer in AR metaverse assets. Whether it's wearables, which I just did a drop with genies this week, or whether it's sculptures, I just did a drop with artifacts like 2 weeks ago. Like how we decorate, like my thesis I've had for a long time is that we're all going to be wearing glasses that are AR augmented. And as much as I love having this physical art, I could put all this other augmented art on my ceiling that I see, or a sculpture, right? On the floor. I think there's a lot of how we decorate ourselves and our environment is going to be the personality we project in the future digital worlds. And so as an artist and creator, I think building assets that are interoperable, instead of betting on land in specific metaverses, it's better to bet on interoperable assets that'll work in all of them. And so I want to create more of that stuff. I still think NFTs are going to become more and more a part of ticketing. And I think there's some interesting aspects of that haven't, even if one, an NFT can be a ticket, but two, when you have that ticket, it can also give you merchandise or something, there's all this other cool stuff, or recording of the concert. I feel like we haven't even touched the surface of what a ticket can be yet. So I'm certainly, I think it'll, whether it's called an NFT or not, digital assets that are ownable will be a part of our lives in so many aspects.
Do you think that will extend to some of the metaverse places like CryptoVoxels and Decentraland? Do you think people are going to get involved in it that much when they want their avatar to look a certain way, and you can have a Gucci bag that's actually from Gucci and it's not a knockoff. Like,
I
do you
mean,
feel that coming, or is that just kind of pie in the sky?
I do. I mean, that's why I did the Genies drop, which I mean, they're going to work with fashion brands, I'm sure. But I think the question is, what will that metaverse be? Will it be crypto voxels, or will it be Fortnite's new iteration? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of metaverses, and that's why I'm like not.
That's why you want everything to interoperate.
Exactly. Like I love crypto voxels. I own many plots and I love to build within it because I think it's the easiest to build for, and it's also the easiest to use on devices. But it's not necessarily growing at a rate that, like, say, the Sandbox is growing. And but why is that? Sandbox is still in beta. It's like, I think crypto voxel suffers from being a little rough around the edges and having a small team that doesn't drop things very often. But I appreciate it, and I wouldn't be where I'm at now without having done a lot of stuff in crypto boxes over the last 2.5 years.
Yeah.
I still do WIT meetups with Token Smart, and whenever I do like a drop on Nifty Gateway, I think it's a great place to congregate. But I think maybe the Bored Apes metaverse will be the next big thing, or maybe that's still 2 years out, who knows? But I have a feeling GLB sculptures will work in all of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the wonderful thing about crypto is you don't know what's coming next, just that something is coming next.
Yeah. Well, every game studio, every AAA game studio, I'm sure, is at least considering the idea of building some sort of metaverse that has digital assets. I mean, Fortnite already does with wearables, but it's just not something you can sell very easily.
Right.
So it's just a matter of time, I think. But I would look at,
that's
like,
why Axie Infinity is interesting, right? Because that's a cryptocurrency you can translate into, fiat currency, and there you go.
Yeah, well, same with like Cool Cats is doing milk and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think that's a trick in gaming, the play to earn idea. The question is play to earn fun, or is it just work? And I think that's where Axie and all these other things, they're just grinds. They're not fun. And it's like, if I'm going to play to earn, I want to actually play, not work.
Yeah. That's a great point. That's a great point. Well, hey, as somebody who's covered crypto for a long time, it's been really amazing to have artists and musicians kind of come into the space through the NFT kind of opportunity. It's just made it a lot more fun, a lot more interesting, a lot more colorful. You're a great example of that, Bryan. So thank you very much for what you're doing. And it was just really a pleasure to talk to you today.
Thanks so much, man. I had a great time.
All right. Take care.
You too.